If the dendrite of a neuron is stimulated strongly enough to reach the neuron's electrical threshold, an action potential or nerve impulse results. Once the neuron is stimulated, a critical change occurs. The membrane becomes permeable to sodium ions, causing Na to rush into the ICF. The ICF becomes more positively charged than the ECF, reversing the original resting polarity. Sodium ions continue to pour into the axon until the ICF reaches an electrical potential of plus 30 MV. Note that depending on the source, this number may vary from plus 30 to plus 40 MV. The membrane is now said to be completely depolarized. The spike seen on a voltage graph during depolarization is called an action potential or nerve impulse. In order to send another impulse, the membrane must be returned to its original resting polarity by the process of repolarization. Sodium channels in the membrane close and positive ions are actively transported out of the axon back to the ECF. In this way, the ICF is returned to its relatively negative state and the ECF to its relatively positive state. The depolarization and repolarization of one point on the membrane takes 1/500th of a second. Once a particular point on the membrane has been depolarized, the impulse travels down the axon by the process of conduction. Conduction occurs because an increase in sodium permeability at one point on the membrane causes increased permeability at an adjacent point. The action potential is conducted along the membrane as a wave of depolarization. If the axon is covered in myelin, the insulating Schwann cells prevent the entire axon from depolarizing. Instead, the action potential skips rapidly from one exposed node of Ranvier to the next. Myelinated neurons are therefore able to conduct impulses much faster than non-myelinated axon. Not all stimuli cause an action potential. A stimulus above the threshold of negative 50 MV will initiate an action potential in a neuron. Sub-threshold stimuli simply fade out. All action potentials, regardless of the intensity of stimulus that caused them, reached a voltage of plus 30 MV. This is called the all or none response. Instead of causing a larger action potential, stronger stimuli cause an increase in the frequency of depolarization. For example, more intense pain translates to more impulse per second. An impulse being conducted down a neuron will eventually meet a synapse. A synapse is the space between the synaptic knob of a presynaptic neuron and the dendrite of a postsynaptic neuron. The mechanism by which an impulse is passed across a synapse is called a transmission. The process of transmission begins when an action potential arrives at an axon terminal. Calcium ions enter into the axon, stimulating synaptic vesicles in the synaptic knob to release neurotransmitter molecules into the synapse. The neurotransmitters then diffuse across the synapse and bind with receptor sites on the postsynaptic dendrite, causing it to depolarize. All neurotransmitters are proteins produced by neurons. The most common neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. Others include serotonin, dopamine, GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid, and norepinephrine. Hypersecretion or hyposecretion of neurotransmitters can have major effect on behavior, motion, sensation, and the thought pattern. If a neurotransmitter were to remain in a synapse, it would cause the postsynaptic neuron to continuously depolarize. This is prevented by the presence of an enzyme that inactivates the transmitter. For example, a split second after the neurotransmitter acetylcholine is released into a synapse, the enzyme cholinesterase is released, inactivating acetylcholine. Nervous system. The nervous system consists of the central nervous system, CNS, and the peripheral nervous system, PNS. The CNS is composed of the brain and a spinal cord, while the PNS is composed of the spinal nerves that extend from both sides of the cord. Peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is made of 31 pairs of spinal nerves that extend from the spinal cord. Each spinal nerve of the somatic system contains two kinds of neurons. Sensory neurons bring sensory information into the central nervous system from sensory receptors. Motor neurons send motor command out to muscle. Automatic nervous system of the PNS regulates smooth muscles of gland and organ over which a person has no conscious control. The sympathetic component of the autonomic system comes into play when there is a perceived threat. Sympathetic response prepare the body for fight or flight. Blood is diverted from the gut, excretory system, reproductive system, and the skin to the skeletal muscles, heart, lungs, and brain. Heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing rate rise while pupils dilate. Once the threat has passed, the parasympathetic division of the autonomic system returns body systems to normal by reversing sympathetic effect. The sympathetic system is stimulated by the neurotransmitter norepinephrine, which may be referred to as adrenaline. The parasympathetic system is stimulated by the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. Central nervous system. The central nervous system, CNS, is composed of the brain and the spinal cord. The spinal cord carries sensory nerve impulse from the sensory neuron of the PNS to the brain. It also carries motor impulse from the brain to the motor neuron in the spinal nerve. The human brain can be divided into structural and functional regions. The top portion of the brain is called the cerebrum. It is highly convolute to increase surface area and has a right and a left hemisphere. Each hemisphere has a gray non-myelinated cortex and a myelinated medulla. The cerebrum can be divided into four major lobes. The frontal lobe controls personality and contains the motor cortex that command voluntary motion. The parietal lobe contains the sensory cortex that processes sensation. The occipital lobe at the back of the cerebrum contains the visual cortex. The temporal lobe on the left and the right side of the cerebrum contain the auditory cortex and control hearing. When nerve track from one side of the body ascend the spinal cord on the way to the brain, they cross over and enter the opposite side of the brain. As a result, the right hemisphere sense and control the left side of the body and vice versa. The right and the left cerebral hemispheres are also specialized for slightly different tasks. The right hemisphere specializes in creative, spatial, and nonverbal expressions such as art and music. The left hemisphere specializes in logic and is the home of speech, language, and mathematical ability. The right and the left hemisphere are connected by the corpus callosum, which is a band of myelinated fiber that transmit information between the hemisphere. The cerebellum, which also consists of two hemispheres, sits at the top of the brainstem and coordinates muscular movement. The pons is a relay center for the information moving to and from the cerebrum. The medulla oblongata controls the sympathetic and parasympathetic function of the autonomic nervous system, including breathing, heart rate, and the priority shunting of blood to different parts of the body. The pituitary gland secretes many hormones. The hypothalamus controls temperature, hunger, thirst, and monitor the endocrine system. Nerve pathways connect stimuli with response. The simplest nerve pathway is the reflex, which does not involve any participation by the brain. Instead, the spinal cord acts to connect a specific sensory stimulus with a specific response. Reflexes, such as the knee-jerk reflex, are present at birth. A reflex begins with a sensory receptor sending an impulse along a sensory neuron of a spinal nerve, which synapses with an interneuron in the spinal cord. The interneuron then synapses with a specific motor neuron that carries out motor impulse out through the spinal nerve to an effector,
Doors
neither a
normally
muscle
open on the
nor
left.
gland. Because the brain is not involved, reflex response are rapid and often life-saving. The eye. Sensory organs all stimulate sensory nerves that carry information to the CNS. For example, the eye converts light signals into action potential in the optic nerve, which transmit the signal to the visual cortex of the brain. The eye has three layers: the sclera, the choroid, and the retina. The sclera is the rigid outer protective layer of the eyeball. It is white except for the transparent part at the front called the cornea. The middle layer is the choroid, which contains blood vessels that nourish the retina. The retina is the inner layer where the actual photoreceptors are located. Rods are photoreceptors found mostly on the periphery of the retina. Rods perceive black and white images and function only in the low light levels. Cones are photoreceptors that absorb a red, green, or blue light, and they function at high light level. The highest concentration of cones occur at the fovea, which is found directly at the back of the retina. The fovea provide the most acute vision. Within the eyeball, certain structure focus light onto the retina. The convex surface of the cornea begins this process. Behind the cornea is the watery aqueous humor. The iris is the colored circular muscle suspended behind the aqueous humor. It dilates and constricts to control the amount of light entering the eyeball through the pupil. Suspended behind the iris is the biconvex lens made of transparent protein, which converge light rays so that they fall on the retina. The lens is attached to ciliary muscles that change the shape of the lens in the process of accommodation. When accommodating to view distant object, the ciliary muscle tug on the lens, making it flatter. When accommodating to view near objects, the ciliary muscles relax, allowing the lens to become more spherical. Behind the lens, the eyeball is filled with clear, gelatinous, vitreous humor that maintain the eyeball's shape. Abnormalities in the shape of the eye cause many people to require corrective lens. Nearsight people have eyeballs that are too long and cannot focus on distant objects because the image focuses in front of the retina instead of directly onto it. Farsight people have eyeballs that are too short, which causes the image to focus behind the retina. People with astigmatism have a cornea or lens that does not have a smooth curvature, so one part of the visual field is in focus while other parts are not. A cataract forms when a lens becomes cloudy. Glaucoma is damage to the retina caused by excessive pressure from the buildup of aqueous humor. The ear. The ear converts compressional waves in the air into compressional waves in the fluid of the inner ear. The frequency of sound waves determines the pitch of the sound, and the amplitude of the wave determine the volume of the sound. The ear has three parts: the outer ear, the air-filled middle ear, and the fluid-filled middle ear. The outer ear consists of the pinna and auditory canal. The middle ear consists of the structures from the tympanic membrane to the oval window. The inner ear is composed of the coiled cochlea, semicircular canal, and the saccule and utricle. The air pressure inside the middle ear is kept equal to the air pressure in the auditory canal by the eustachian tube, which allows air to pass between the middle ear and the back of the throat, and vice versa. Microorganisms can also take this route, resulting in ear infection. The hearing mechanism depends on the accurate passage of vibration through several parts of the ear. Sound waves are directed into the auditory canal by the pinna. The eardrum converts the sound wave into vibration that are then carried across the middle ear by the ear bone or ossicles to the oval window of the cochlea. Vibration of the oval window produce compressional waves in the fluid within the cochlea. These waves travel along the organ of Corti, a membrane covered in hair cells that function as hearing receptor. When a compressional wave deflects a hair cell, it creates an impulse in the auditory nerve that travels to the auditory cortex of the temporal lobes of the brain. The location of a deflected hair cell on the organ of Corti determines the pitch of the sound that the brain will perceive. The cochlear compressional waves are dispersed by the round window. The three fluid-filled semicircular canals have hair cell receptors that respond to motion. The brain uses this information to allow the body to keep its balance when moving. The saccule and utricle detect the position of the head with respect to gravity using a similar mechanism. Hearing loss is treated by technologies such as hearing aids and a cochlear implant. Hearing aid amplify and transmit sound wave to the eardrum. Cochlear implant are surgically implanted and function by stimulating the auditory nerve inside the cochlea with electrical impulse. Other sensory receptor. There are many other sensory receptors in the human body that provide the CNS with information about the internal and external environment. Thermoreceptor in the skin and in the hypothalamus responded to temperature change. Proprioceptors provide information regarding the spatial position of the limbs. Chemoreceptors, such as the olfactory receptor that respond to smell, and the taste receptor in the tongue, respond to the specific shape of molecule. The main difference between these two receptors is that the taste receptor respond to dissolved chemical stimuli and olfactory receptor respond to airborne chemical stimuli. The endocrine system. The endocrine system, like the nervous system, allows parts of the body to communicate with each other. Endocrine gland secrete hormone into the bloodstream. Hormones are proteins or steroids that act on specific target cells to change their activity. Peptide or protein hormone act by bonding to receptor on the surface of target cells. Steroid hormones pass through the cells and the nuclear membranes of their target cells, binding to receptors within the nucleus, changing the expression of genes. Homeostasis. Homeostasis is the process by which a stable condition is maintained. In the body, homeostasis is maintained by negative feedback mechanisms, which are self-correcting system. A monitor, usually the hypothalamus, constantly scans the blood for the levels of several body parameters. When a parameter increases beyond the normal range, the monitor responds by decreasing the parameter. Conversely, when a parameter decreases below the normal range, the monitor responds by increasing the parameter. This self-correcting system is called a negative feedback because each effect negates the previous one. For example, the metabolic rate of cells is controlled by negative feedback of the hormone thyroxine. If the hypothalamus detects a high thyroxine level, it stops releasing thyroid-stimulating hormone-releasing factor, TSHRF, preventing the anterior pituitary from secreting thyroid-stimulating hormone TSH. This stops thyroid gland from secreting thyroxine, thus reducing metabolic rate. Eventually, low thyroxine level will negatively feed back to the hypothalamus, causing it to release TSHRF, which stimulates the anterior pituitary to release TSH, which in turn causes the thyroid gland to release thyroxine. In a few cases, a blood parameter is kept constant by a pair of antagonistic hormones that counteract each other. For example, the hormone insulin decreases blood glucose when it rises too high. The hormone glucagon increases blood glucose when it falls too low. PTH and calcitonin are also antagonistic hormones. In contrast to negative feedback, positive feedback is used to magnify, not correct, an original stimulus. For example, the secretion of small amounts of the hormone oxytocin brings about labor. Positive feedback results in increasingly higher amounts of oxytocin secretion until the baby is born. The same is true of the hormone prolactin and its effect on milk supply. Comparing the nervous system to the endocrine system. The human body consists of somewhere around 600 trillion cells, all of which must communicate with each other to maintain homeostasis and ensure survival. Two communication systems exist in the body, the nervous system and the endocrine system. Nervous connections are direct. Communication is very rapid, within millisecond, but the effect of nervous stimulation disappears quickly. The endocrine system communicate using hormones rather than neurons. Hormones are chemical messengers secreted from one location and are carried by the bloodstream to a target location, where they have their effect. Because the bloodstream moves much slower than nerve conduction, hormonal response take longer to occur, minutes or hours, but their effect are sustained for as long as the hormone stays in the bloodstream. Effect of hormone imbalance. There are many physiological consequences if the body is unable to maintain homeostatic hormone level. Hypothyroidism, or too little thyroxine, causes a low metabolic rate. A person suffering from hypothyroidism may feel tired, apathetic, cold, and may gain weight. In children, hypothyroidism results in cretinism, characterized by slowed mental and physical development. In hyperthyroidism, or grave disease, excess thyroxine causes a higher metabolic rate, which results in high blood pressure, sweating, irritability, sleep disturbances, and weight loss. A goitry is a swelling of the thyroid gland, often due to a lack of iodine in the diet. Iodine is needed to produce thyroxine. Without thyroxine, negative feedback produces more and more TSH, continually stimulating the thyroid, enlarging the gland, often to an enormous size. The ability to produce an adequate supply of insulin as a child is referred to as type 1 diabetes mellitus. Without insulin, cells are impermeable to glucose. Cells starve for fuel, resulting in fatigue and eventual coma. Indicator of inadequate insulin are high blood glucose levels and the presence of glucose in the urine. Type 2 diabetes mellitus usually affect older or obese individual and is caused by an inadequate supply of insulin receptor, resulting in the same symptom as type 1. Diabetes insipidus, unrelated to diabetes mellitus, is caused by a lack of ADH. The individual is unable to correct dehydration by reabsorbing water from the urine into the bloodstream. Water remains in the urine, resulting in copious amounts of dilute urine, thirst, and further dehydration of the blood. Imbalances in HGH secretion cause abnormalities of height. Dwarfism results when low HGH secretion as a child stunt growth of long bones. Excess HGH secretion as a child result in gigantism.